Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. This is where we take the big resilience research and best practices and break it down into small bite-sized pieces that we can begin using immediately to strengthen ourselves and others. What if you could learn from a man who is trailblazing in local public service? Would you spend the next 28 minutes with us? What if in the next 10 minutes you could hear what factors protected this man as a young child when he experienced trauma? Would you hang out with us? Who is us? My other half today is Stacy Walker. Stacy is an elected member of the Linn County, Iowa Board of Supervisors. When he was 4 years old, he lost his mother to a homicide that remains unresolved today, and he was raised in Cedar Rapids, Iowa by his grandmother. Stacy has forged an impressive path through nonprofit and entrepreneurial work, including working with the Case Foundation in Washington, D.C. So happy to have you with us today. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you so much for having me, Mollie.
So you experienced as a child both the chronic trauma of poverty and other things, as well as the tragic loss of your mother. Tell us about your childhood.
Well, when I was young, I was raised initially at first by my mother, who was a teenage mom. She did not have a college education, but she did the best she could. She raised me and my younger sister primarily in Section 8 housing units around the southeast side of Cedar Rapids. When I was 4, my mother had a friend who lived in Buffalo, New York, who was ill. And my mother gave me the option of going with her for a week or so over the summer, or staying with my grandmother while she went to take care of her friend. My grandmother, like most other grandmothers, knew how to bake, and so I was really interested in sticking around with my grandmother. So my sister and I stayed with my grandmother while my mother went to New York, and unfortunately that was the last time I saw my mother. While she was in Buffalo, New York, she was murdered, and the case to this day was never solved. My sister and I went to live with my grandmother permanently, who also was a single parent for most of her life. She actually went to college late in life, in her 50s, and graduated from Kirkwood Community College here in Cedar Rapids. Her dream was to become a nurse, and she raised my sister and I on Social Security benefits, fixed income. Of course, after retiring from her job of being a nurse's aide in the hospital system here. We grew up in a pretty dangerous neighborhood. We survived off of free and reduced lunch and food stamps, but my grandmother really was my rock, and she was the reason why I'm here today. She was the reason why we made it. So that's, the gist of my childhood, and it really has informed my views on what's important and what I hope leaders in the community and policymakers need to be focusing on, and that is finding ways in which we can change people's economic dispositions in life, support programs that provide protective factors for individuals experiencing trauma, and individuals growing up in these neighborhoods that we really need to focus on.
And I know the first time we chatted about your background, and I was talking about the resilience that you've demonstrated, and I said, how and why? And you said, I'm not quite sure. And then we started talking about the Thrive model that we use through NRI, and it was click, 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 started falling in place. So your grandmother served as that trusted adult of the Thrive model. The next H is for high expectations. What did your grandmother or others in your life teach you about holding you to a standard of your best efforts or excellence and supporting you in learning and growing?
Right. Let me start by saying this. It's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. He said, "Everything I am and everything I ever will be, I owe to my angel mother." That is true for me with my grandmother. She, again, being a single parent, born in Opelika, Alabama, rural Alabama, and coming to Chicago originally towards the tail end of the Great Migration, where many African Americans were leaving the American South for the Midwest and for the West Coast. she really was the exemplary role model in my life. She came from very humble beginnings, but still knew how important it was for me to work hard in everything I do, to get an education. And seeing how hard she worked and understanding her expectations for me really made me understand that excellence is something that can be learned. It's a learned habit, and excellence should be the standard. So, you know, for me it was, she wanted my report card to read, you know, all A's or A's and B's, and if she saw a B on my report card, the conversation was, how do we turn that into an A? What resources do I need? She kept me in the church against my will on many occasions. We went to church often. And she was a big proponent of making sure I participated in as many programs and other sort of extracurricular activities as possible. So my grandmother, again, the #1 role model who at a very early age taught me that you got to give it your all, you got to give life your all, and that excellence can be a learned habit. And of course, you know, as I said, I participated in a lot of other activities, and I was an athlete in high school and in college, and when you get into that world too, you kind of learn how important it is to treat excellence as a habit.
And that's the perfect segue to the THR, is resilient skills building. And you did learn a lot of that as an athlete. It has built-in adversity and tough losses. What mindset have you found that really serves you through that type of adversity in life?
Yeah, well, adversity is going to happen to everybody at some point and at varying levels. You know, I played football in high school and in college, and you learned how to accept a loss, but you don't accept a single loss as a final defeat. The same is true for life. So your mindset has to be something where you control what you control, and all of the things that are outside of your control, you have to somehow let go of those things. You work on, again, the things that you can work on. You understand excellence as something you can achieve, excellence as the norm. And you never let, one of the things I heard a coach say to me one day was, you don't let your highs take you too high, and you don't let your lows destroy you. And so that's kind of the mindset I take with me in terms of building resilience.
Excellent advice in athletics and in life. Tool #1 for today: create a norm of excellence for yourself and for all the kids in your life. Nurturing hope for a better future? Stay with us. Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with Stacey Walker, Linn County Supervisor. We're kind of running through the Thrive model and applying it to your life. The next I is involvement. What is your first memory of being part of a community as a child?
Well, you know, I mentioned earlier in the segment I was born and raised sort of throughout the Section 8 housing projects that exist on the southeast side of town. Which meant most of the folks in that neighborhood either looked like me or found themselves in the same socioeconomic station as myself and my family. There were a lot of kids, and one of the earliest memories I have of being a part of a community is just being outside playing on the playground. And we often had folks from outside of the community come into the neighborhood, and we would venture outside of the neighborhood. And one of the things that really stood out to me was how we all sort of had each other's back on the playground. And there were a couple times where some playground fights would break out, and I clearly remember feeling an obligation to de-escalate the fight or sort of stand in between two people fighting, because they were my tribe, they were my people, that was my community, and we all kind of hung together in that regard. And as you go through school and life, you sort of understand and you see clearly the social stratifications that kind of play out in school. It's really highlighted, I think, in middle school and high school. People kind of form their cliques. And part of my community was defined by where I lived. Part of my community was defined by my race. And it just so happened that most of the African Americans growing up in this community, in the larger community, happened to find themselves in the same social economic position. And I would say my community was defined by those factors. The fact that most of us lived at or below the federally defined poverty line, and the fact that most of us happen to be minorities.
And I love within that community, there was a little playground justice going on.
Yes.
You have your little badge.
Yes, yes.
That's so you. So the next factor is vision. And it's about believing that the future can be better than the current day. What role has vision played in your life?
Mollie, that's critical. Having that hope that your future situation will be better than your current is so important. You have to be able to see it, and that's where vision comes into play. And honestly, that's where a strong, trusted adult can help you with that. You know, I was lucky enough to have friends all across the socioeconomic spectrum as I grew up. And I had friends whose parents were attorneys. I had friends whose parents were successful business folks in the community. And I was able to catch glimpses of what I thought I would want my life to be like. By the time I hit 7th grade, I had a social studies teacher, Mark Dirks at McKinley, who really helped me understand what a career in public service could look like. And that's when I set my sights on it. I figured out that you could study political science and public policy in college. And since 7th grade, really, I knew that that was the field I was going to go into. I held that vision in my mind and in my heart. And I like to think that it's materializing.
Oh, it certainly is, and very quickly. When I actually saw your graduation date into the numbers, and you're so young and have accomplished so much, or I should say you've accomplished so much for the age that you are. So you are on a wonderful path of service. The last factor of Thrive is enrichment, and having that ongoing ability to grow and nurture our strengths and to share them and have that meaning in our lives. How did that play out in your youth?
You know, one of the things, I do a lot of mentoring with the local Boys and Girls Club here, and one of the things I tell other mentors and I tell parents is that, you know, we often, as human beings, we need certain validation in life. We need, whether it's being part of a football team and earning, you know, high honors in football, or whether you're doing very well in class and in school, we need those different validators in life. So what I like to say to parents and to my colleagues is find that flame in a kid, because it's there. There's something there that they like to do. It could be playing clarinet. It could be they find themselves doing well in soccer. Academically, they could be doing pretty well. Whatever it is, find it and fan that flame, because sometimes that's a saving grace, and that's all a kid has that's going to help them get through. And a lot of times that extracurricular, that activity, that program can be the cornerstone of that larger vision that we need to nurture in that person. And if they can hold that vision in their mind and their heart, it can get them through some pretty tough times.
So I have seen you speak, and I watch the kids line up afterwards, and I've told you this, you have just a talent for really reaching kids directly. So if we have any students watching today, or parents want to help their child, and looking at these factors that have protected you and helped you get to where you are, what would your advice be directly to a student who thought, well, I don't need, adults really don't get me, I don't need a mentor, or I don't need to be involved in this and that. Mm-hmm. What would be your advice directly to a young person?
Well, first off, I was there. Yeah. I thought that I did need that sort of trusted adult in my life, all the while not knowing that I had one, and it was my grandmother. So what I'd say is these role models, these trusted adults, can come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. They don't have to be related to you. You know, I have a lot of coaches in my life. A lot of my other friends, their parents have played big roles in my life and my development. So I'd say be open to it, understand that they can come from anywhere, and find the best in people. It doesn't have to be just one. There are many individuals here in the Cedar Rapids community who I look up to and I admire, and I tend to take the best of their personalities, the best of who they are, and I try to emulate those things. So that would be my advice, is to stay open to it.
I love that. And really helping kids almost create that self-ideal, and they can take pieces from different people and begin to build that out starting today. Great advice from Stacey Walker. So here's tool number 2. We all need validation. Help others feel good about who they are and help them see themselves as greater than their current situation. Collaborating to create safe, equitable, and thriving communities. More about this when we come back. Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti. Welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today, we are speaking with Stacey Walker, Linn County Supervisor, and you also are co-chair of the Safe, Equitable, and Thriving Communities Task Force.
That's correct.
What is your mission at the task force?
Well, the Safe, Equitable, and Thriving Communities Task Force, or the SET Task Force for short, really began after we had a shooting in Cedar Rapids that involved 2 really young kids. I think the kids involved in the shooting, one was 13 years old and the other one was 14. The city was really rocked by this because we knew that we had, violence is always a serious issue, but when the issue starts to affect folks that young directly, we knew that it was a pretty big issue. So the task force is a group of community leaders from varying disciplines and expertise that came together to really study the systemic causes of violence, particularly gun violence. And one of the things we quickly found out was that a problem so weighty, so big, like violence and gun violence, there is no silver bullet. There's no quick solution to it, and in fact the solutions are complex, they're vast, they're diverse, and they are many. And so what we did is we, as a part of the task force, we formed 6 subcommittees: education, housing, law enforcement, programming, community engagement, and I'm missing a 6th.
Did you say housing?
I may not have said housing. So economic opportunities actually is the last one that we have. We worked on this stuff for over a year. Each subcommittee had several different experts that they brought together to focus on this stuff. And the bottom line is this: if you want to get to solving for, or at least addressing in a meaningful way, gun violence, we've got to do a lot of other things. Namely, we've got to make better the economic situations of many of the people in these neighborhoods where violence is prevalent. And how you make better one's economic situation necessarily requires, safe and affordable housing. It requires us closing the achievement gap for the individuals who are coming out of these neighborhoods. It requires safe communities, right? And people feeling safe in their homes, and addressing and policing these communities in a way that's fair and equitable and community-based. So we realized that solving for or addressing violence in a meaningful way was really a complex task. So that's what I've been busy doing, working with all of these experts, going into schools, figuring out what our students need, working with adults whose economic prospects could be improved, and working with educational professionals to figure out how we sort of integrate this stuff in Cedar Rapids schools and surrounding areas.
And you've had a lot of community conversations as part of this work. What are some of the gist of what you're hearing? Were you surprised by anything, or what did you hear when you went to the community and said, talk to us?
Well, Mollie, one of the questions we asked is, what kind of community do you want to live in? And it turns out whether you are living, at the poverty line or you are a wealthy person, everybody kind of has the sort of same idea of what a good community should be. And that was pretty telling to us. Everybody wants to be safe. Everybody wants to have a job where they can earn enough money to live a dignified life and provide for their family. Everybody wants their schools to be good. And folks want to know their neighbors. One of the sentiments that we heard often, I think, was a play on a famous Paul Wellstone quote that we all do better when we all do better, right? So it's kind of figuring out what's that special sauce that's going to lift all ships together. And really, that gets at the heart of the safe, equitable, and thriving communities. What is going to be best for the whole? How can we maximize the amount of good that we do for everyone? So those were more or less the sentiments that we heard when we talked to individuals in the community.
I love that sense of interconnectedness, and we all truly want the same things for ourselves and for our families, and so then you start looking at how to get there. I know you have a particular passion for the subcommittee work on economic development. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, we're calling it economic opportunities. There are economic development professionals that when you say economic development, they think of sort of one thing. The reason we chose to go with economic opportunities is because we feel that everyone in the community needs to have access to a good education. They need to have access to good jobs. They need to have access to job training and job interview training and things of that nature. And when we are able to break down the barriers to these things, then we think we're providing more economic opportunities to these individuals, particularly individuals who come from certain disadvantaged circumstances or come from certain socioeconomic positions where they're not afforded some of these things that I think most of us might take for granted, most of us might see as a privilege. Where they may not know where to go to access these resources. So I really wanted to focus in on breaking down barriers to economic opportunities because, again, I think that's the magic sauce. I think that's a silver bullet. If individuals in all quadrants of our community had the opportunity to work a 9-to-5, earn enough money to take care of their family, put food on the table, put a little money away in the bank and save it, and had the opportunity to advance in their career, I think if we could share the wealth, so to speak, if more of those opportunities were available to a larger swath of our population, we would see a necessary decline in violence. And so that's one of the subcommittees that I think there's possibly the most opportunity to do the most amount of good for our residents.
And then across this work, underlying it, the report is very well written, well done, but you talk about that underlying sense of despair and hopelessness that's being fed by these barriers.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
That's just it. We hit on it earlier in the segment. It's what I may call a lack of vision, others may call a lack of hope. The inability to see that their future can be better than their present circumstance. And what is so important to a lot of these problems, whether it's gun violence, whether it's the pervasiveness of poverty or mental health issues that we may face, it's allowing people to understand that their tomorrow can be better than their today. And that's a lot harder, and we need serious community leaders to invest a lot of time and energy in all of these different subcommittees and these different efforts. But I think over time we can get there and we can help people see a brighter future for themselves.
Complex work, but powerful, and all of these community stakeholders coming together. I hope you at home are inspired. I certainly am. So here is your tool number 3, a resilient community understands that single-issue problems like gun violence have complex roots that are fed by a sense of disconnection, hopelessness, and despair. And as it was said by the community members, we all do better when we all do better. Thank you, Stacy, for bringing these words of wisdom to life for us today, and thank you for joining us at home. This is Dr. Mollie Marti with Resiliency Matters. Thank you for joining us on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.